Okay, back again. And hopefully you did like me and went and checked. It's Russell Brand. Yeah, so I hope you had a chance to sort of to watch a bit of Russell Brand or a bit of The Tube. Okay, so that's commercial broadcasting, but what about digital media? And of course, we are now in the digital age. So digital media has meant that there's been a massive amount of deregulation and a huge rise in different TV channels, different broadcasting formats. The internet now allows anybody to broadcast what they like. And in fact, even these lectures, I'm putting them on to Panopto, and they are then, of course, going on to the University of Kent's website and their intranet. So they're only available to people who have access to the University of Kent's website, once they sign in. But I could very easily, and in fact, some lecturers across the country and other universities are actually putting theirs onto YouTube. For lots of different reasons, but partly to actually to share their lectures widely, but also to maintain their own personal copyright, because in theory the copyright should stay with the person who is doing the broadcast. It's your voice, or in this case my voice, being broadcast. But as soon as it goes up onto the university's website, it sort of becomes theirs, if you like. So some people, as I say, are putting things onto YouTube and then linking to that rather than using the university's own Panopto or whatever sort of similar type of platform other universities are using. So digital media allows any of us to have our own TV show, a YouTube channel, or to do live streaming using Twitch, or using things like TikTok, and this means that we can all become personalities, media personalities, and this very much harks back to that notion that we're all allowed our 15 minutes of fame. Um, so we've got three images along the top there. The first one on the left is taken from the Black Mirror TV show, which of course is written by Charlie Brooker. And it's an episode that is actually about social media and how that's such a huge part of our lives now. So if you haven't seen that, it's available, I believe, on Netflix. So I think it was originally, might have been shown on the BBC, but as I say, it's now available on Netflix. And then in the middle there, we have a screenshot from the YouTube gaming broadcaster. And if I don't even know what his real name is, but his screen name and the name that he uses for his broadcasts is PewDiePie. And he has been quite an interesting character, because some of the stuff that he has put up online about games has been deemed to be extremely offensive. He has been he's used a great deal of offensive language, and not just sort of common or garden swearing, but actually using very discriminatory language. So he's quite divisive. People are very divided by whether they agree with him, like him, or find him offensive or not. And then the last image there is these are a series of YouTube videos, which because they came out before TikTok existed, but now the equivalent would be very much on TikTok. So these appear to be videos, sort of like hidden camera videos of this particular young woman in conversation with her boyfriend. and the boyfriend is sort of interrogating her reasons for doing certain things. And certainly one of them that this picture here depicts is her reasons for voting Brexit. And the idea is that, you know, we are sort of then laughing at her because she has ill-informed ideas, but actually the thing to remember is that it's all been created for comedic purposes, and in fact, you know, the couple that produce these are comedians. And so, you know, it's staged. So that's the other thing to remember, that when we see things online, particularly on YouTube or TikTok, an awful lot of the time it's not authentic. It is actually, a great deal of it is staged. And, you know, it's something that we've all perhaps got used to, of not necessarily knowing, and particularly bearing in mind we looked at fake news the other week, that notion of reality and truthfulness is quite a complex area. So we might watch TV programs that set themselves up as being reality TV, but actually, of course, they've been edited. But even before the editing, they have been, situations have been set up. So TV shows like Big Brother and you know, I'm a Celebrity, and so on, they have been set up in certain ways. There are expectations that particular participants will behave in certain ways, and in fact, that, you know, there is even there's a TV drama that you can see on Amazon that's an American show, and I think it's called something like Reality, but it's a drama show that actually is about a reality TV show like the Bachelor or the Bachelorette, but actually they show you as part of the drama that actually when people are being selected for TV shows like that, they are selected to fit into almost what Vladimir Prop would have said were sort of particular archetypes. So, you know, the villain, the heroine, you know, and so on. So, as it says there, TV and multi-channel TV has led to reshaping of approach and style. So, you know, we are seeing an awful lot more sort of reality, but in inverted commas, that's not real at all. But we're seeing an awful lot more of that, and people trying to sort of show us something authentic, but actually that it becomes a fabrication as soon as we have the inclusion of a camera. But we do have a democratisation, so anybody can transmit themselves through media. Anybody can have their own website. Anybody can start up their own YouTube channel. And of course, you know, it's technology has become cheaper and more widely available. So it means that we have got a massive democratisation. And it means as well, though, that everyone, regardless of how niche their interests may be, you will find a website that, you know, if you're, I don't know, if you're interested in Victorian thimbles, for example, you will find there is a website out there somewhere, and probably a YouTube channel where people just talk about Victorian thimbles, you know, or something else that's, as I say, we might regard as being incredibly obscure, but it is out there. Um, and we do still, of course, have professional media figures, and they do continue to play a central role in broadcast output. But we are not just viewing that anymore. You know, there is far more that we actually watch, and we have perhaps a possibly a richer diet of media nowadays, or maybe we don't. You know, maybe that's something for you to sort of reflect on and think about. You know, are you watching a really wide range of media outputs? Or are you just sticking to, or do certain groups of people just stick to terrestrial television? Do people avoid or only choose to watch things from the BBC? You know, do people only watch things on demand? Are there groups of people who are avoiding all television and only watching broadcasts from YouTube, for example, and so on? So, you know, we are able to make those choices now, and we've never been able to do that before. Um, But, is it a rich diet, or are we actually becoming siloed into different areas? So we do have conflicting standards and conflicting attitudes. People don't all believe the same thing, of course. So you can see from the two images there that, it's okay to say fuck, but you can't say the N word. And of course, there are extremely good reasons for those two words being acceptable and unacceptable. So the complaints that we have nowadays about the standards of broadcast talk tend to be very much about the BBC perhaps being very biased. And do remember, when it comes to writing essays, that you are making sure that you're using that word bias and biased correctly, and remember that it's a noun and a verb, so you can show bias, but if you are showing bias, then you may well be biased, ed, at the end. So yeah, do make sure that you sort of get that, because that's something that increasingly there are sort of small grammatical errors, particularly with that word, and people will say, I am very biased. Well, that's bias, the noun, and I am biased. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so yes, so there will often be standards about editorial judgment, and certain people being given a lot of airtime at the exclusion of others. So one person that we've seen that with has been how often the UKIP party, and particularly Nigel Farage, how often he's been seen on BBC programmes like Question Time, and he, of course, Nigel Farage, is not an MP. He was an MEP, so he was a member of the European Parliament, but he has stood for election as an MP. I think about 7 or 8 times, and every single time he has lost, including once famously he lost to somebody dressed as a dolphin. But he continues to be invited onto terrestrial television, so to mainstream television, onto the BBC, onto Question Time, to put forward his views. And he is very much an agitator. That's what he does. Yet other political parties and their representatives who have seats in the House of Commons, for example, the Green Party, have had far fewer opportunities to appear on programmes like Question Time. And of course, there's a very straightforward reason for that. Nigel Farage makes good television. People watch things like Question Time and then talk about it at length on social media the following morning, because it's adversarial and antagonistic. So, this is something that we are seeing a great deal. So it's not necessarily about the language being used, but actually it, as it says there, it's about discussing a particular topic, and sometimes the complaints are about incivility or coarseness. It tends to be, yes, we think this is inappropriate to use this particular language here, far more than having people sort of contacting the BBC to say, I watched an episode of Luther or some other TV show and Idris Elba said the word fuck. People aren't going to be complaining about that sort of thing as more that the more likely that they're going to complain about how many times they've seen Nigel Farage. Okay, so so we have a change of language, and this natural aspect of language change, but then also we have that idea of resisting language variation and change, and trying to actually maintain some sort of standard. And Deborah Cameron calls this verbal hygiene, so things that can be said and things that can't be said. So if we get into a little bit of theory now, so this, as you can see from Robin Lakoff, this notion of politeness and civility. So, being considerate towards others and being civil, so that accepted social custom, and that notion of agonism. So, where we get the word antagonistic from, but agon or agon is that notion of challenge and sort of being warlike. So yeah, Deborah Tannen is somebody to look at for that. And then of course we can have a look at John Lloyd's book, What the Media Are Doing to Our Politics, and how the media is shaping our politics and perhaps making it more antagonistic and more divisive. So we have this notion of political correctness, and this is something that we could say is just political correctness is perhaps just another way of saying being polite. But that phrase politically correct, as it says there on the top left, a term used for whiny, overly sensitive pansies who need everything sugar coated for them, which in itself that definition is quite offensive. And Charlton Heston, who was a famous American actor, he said at the Harvard Law School in 1999, political correctness is tyranny with manners. Now, let's not forget that Charlton Heston used to be the head of the National Rifle Association in America, which is a particularly offensive group because, as we see in America, that at the moment maybe not with the pandemic, but it still has gone on, but certainly before the pandemic barely a week would go past without children being shot in schools and guns still being allowed across America because it's perceived to be their right or the right of Americans under the Constitution, which has the right to bear arms. And, then how people define that and whether they define it as individuals or a militia or whatever. But we've all heard the usual arguments about it's not the guns that kill people, and that's something also that Charlton Heston said after the Columbine killings, that the leather coats and long coats ought to be banned and not guns. Because of course lots and lots of people have been killed by long coats, but guns of course are harmless, which of course is sarcasm, just in case you missed that. Anyway, and then the last image there on the right hand side, I'm so sick of political correctness. Okay, try without the political correctness then. I'm so sick of not being able to insult and belittle women and minorities. So that's the flip side. When political correctness is sort of bandied about and people say, I'm not going to be politically correct, what they mean is I'm not actually going to be polite, and instead I want to be able to insult people. And then at the bottom, we have sort of suggestions. So we don't say man up because strength is not defined by sex or gender. We don't say don't be a pussy because I don't believe that any gender is inferior. We don't say bitch because it insists that femininity is inherently negative. We don't say no homo because it means that showing any affection towards someone of the same sex is inherently bad. We don't say that's so gay because the words gay and stupid are not interchangeable. So all of the stuff there at the bottom could be regarded as being politically correct. But personally, and do remember a few weeks ago I did sort of flag up caveat lector, so don't believe everything that I say, sort of read widely, think about it yourself, but personally I think that the image at the bottom and the suggestions of the type of language that we might wish to avoid in certain circumstances because we don't want to offend somebody. We don't want to insult and belittle people. Now, that's not to say that those phrases, man up, don't be a pussy, bitch, no homo, and that's so gay, I'm not saying, and I would imagine that this is the same as this particular image, I certainly am not saying that we should never use them, but I would be saying that, if we're going to use any of those phrases, I would absolutely be using them for comedic purposes. You know, there is a TV show called Man Up. No, it's actually called Man Down. But, you know, so those sorts of phrases, and, you know, we know that when sometimes when people use that phrase, that's so gay, it's not necessarily being used in a pejorative um, setting, you know, it's, or in that context. And also it depends who is saying it. But broadly speaking, yeah, we probably don't want to use those sorts of phrases because they do imply negativity, inferiority, and so on. So going back to Lakoff, so, you know, I'm not going to read through all of this, but, you know, you can have a look at it. The important thing as well here is that image on the left hand side. So back in my day, you could tell whatever joke you wanted, and if somebody or someone didn't like something about it, they were free to fuck off. Okay, so, you know, that does tie into that top quote there from Lakoff, that, you know, when people are worried that people are, you know, that we are being very rude to one another, it does reflect this myth that somehow in the past, this pre-lapsarian Eden, so before the fall, before, you know, from the Bible, before Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, this perfect golden age, everyone was cordial to one another. And this is something that we see quite regularly, particularly amongst people with more right-wing views. Again, that's sort of conservative with both large and small c, that in the past there was this perfect age. When I was a child, blah, 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 you know, everything was perfect. Oh, everybody could leave their front doors unlocked, and, you know, things were much nicer, and, you know, men and women were polite to one another, and so on. That age has never existed. People, human beings, have always been violent, they've always been unpleasant to one another, but equally there have always been high points and culture and you know, politeness to one another, because it makes a society work. So, is all of this true? So, t-shirt there, angry liberal feminist killjoy. I'm a teenage liberal who gets offended by everything starter pack. You know, and of course, we don't need to go very far to look on social media to find people complaining about liberals and feminists, and that being allied with somebody being a killjoy and having no sense of humour. And, you know, as the image down in the corner there, everyone I don't like is Hitler. The emotional child's guide to political discussion. And again, this is something that has been mentioned, we've talked about in previous weeks, that, and particularly with that notion of fake news, you throw in that phrase, you're just like Hitler, or this is fake news, and then instantly the discussion is cut off. You know, it stops everything. And then we have, you know, that snowflake dictionary. So trigger warning because distressing material is coming up. Well, personally, I think that that's probably a good thing because, you know, then it means that people can actually avoid something they don't wish to deal with. And, you know, all of us are going through different things, particularly with the situation in the world now. And, you know, people perhaps don't want to see graphic pictures of whatever, you know, something offensive, and don't want to get involved in certain discussions because we can't deal with everything at the same time. Microaggressions, you know, offensive behaviour expressed subtly. Well, you know, microaggressions do exist. We know this. Safe space, a place where some discussion topics are not allowed, and so on, you know, no platforming and intersectionality. You know, so actually these are perhaps ways of thinking more holistically about how we communicate with one another. But, you know, a middle path is perhaps the way. I don't know, have a think about it. Is all of this true? The Daily Mail says it's true. So, you know, snowflake millennials are infuriating their senior colleagues with their workplace antics and why they really do need to know their place. Millennials are irritating. He says it's the fault of the parents and the upbringing. let's just remember that in order to be a millennial, that's not people born at the turn of the millennia. So that's not just your generation, but actually it's people from sort of the 10 years previous. So, you know, millennials are in their 20s and 30s now. And apparently, yes, you're all snowflakes. Um, which is just crazy. But you know, if you flip that title, that heading, that headline around, and look at what it means in reverse. So essentially, senior colleagues, so older people, don't like having to watch what they're saying. They don't like having to be polite. You know, they want younger people to know their place so that they can be rude and offensive. Uh, and of course, the etiquette expert is a man, and I'm willing to bet that he's a white man. So, yeah, so millennials apparently are irritating, and it's all their parents' fault. It's interesting, it says their parents, but I'd be actually willing to bet again that it's probably more likely to be the fault of their mother, because the Daily Mail don't like mothers, or they don't like single mothers. They don't like political correctness. They want the world to go back. And you can, oh, actually, yes, there's a picture of William Hanson at the top there. Of course, he's a white man. Okay, so it's not just millennials and sort of their colleagues who are feeling angry, and you know, it's certainly not just people who are the liberals who are unhappy about rudeness. The alt-right, you know, right-wingers, they are very, very angry. So Alex Jones there, yeah, the US radio show host, not the BBC One show host, who is, you know, a Welsh woman. But no, Alex Jones, who has his own radio show where he shouts and rants about things. And of course, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who is also known as Tommy Robinson, who's the leader of the English Defence League, who I think is currently out of prison, but is a regular visitor at Her Majesty's pleasure in various prisons around the country. And, you know, these are very, very angry white men who, and of course, there are very angry white women as well who are involved. And the far right tends to be, as we only need look at social media or look at the news on any given day, particularly at the moment. They believe that everything ought to go their way, and that people who are not white, or who are not male, or who don't fit, shall we say, who don't keep to the those meta narratives, you know, those stories that we used to have in society. If they don't, if people don't conform, you know, that they should go away, and everybody should conform. Women should be at home with children, and men are the ones that should be out, and you know, keeping a Christian nation, and so on and so forth. We know these stories and these slogans, and they're quite sort of tired. And of course, at the moment, we are currently seeing a serving American president who, whether he likes it or not, will be stepping down in about 6 weeks' time, even though he refuses to accept that he has lost the presidential election. And his supporters also maintaining that it's all some liberal far left conspiracy, and that everything has been faked. And despite the fact that the American presidential election has probably been one of the most watched and monitored election ever, but you know, the alt-right are very angry. So, in summary, offensive words and behaviour are viewed differently over time. What was deemed as being offensive 20 years ago, 50 years ago, is not necessarily offensive now, and there are other things that were deemed acceptable. You know, it was acceptable only 30, 40 years ago to have TV programs like the Black and White Minstrels, which showed white entertainers wearing black face paint and pretending to be black entertainers. And, it was acceptable to use the N word and to treat women in ways that we would not deem acceptable now. So that's changed. And we can use theorists like Lakoff to begin to understand what's happening in language. And, we can look at Deborah Tannen's work and Deborah Cameron's work as well. All of that will begin to help us to understand this. And contemporary online exchanges, so particularly social media, between different factions often descend into impolite language and behaviour. So what Deborah Tannen calls agonism. That challenge, that warlike behaviour, and it's something that we are seeing increasingly online. So that sort of brings us to the end. There's an awful lot of stuff in to watch and to read and look at in the on Moodle, so do that, hopefully in advance of the seminars. And I will see you this week.